Today I wanted to show you a concept which I've been working on and developing for a little while now. Basically, it's the idea of using the beautiful sound of the guitar's open strings and getting it into our vocabulary, so that we can use it within our lines and our improvisations. This is one which I'm actually really excited to share. So for this concept, what we're going to do is choose a root note and work out all the scale options where we can make use of the open strings. So we're going to use the lowest string on the guitar for our root notes, and we're going to move chromatically in order to work out the scales for each of those roots. So first starting with the scales for E, and then the scales for F, for G flat, for G, for A flat, and then for A. We're going to stop at A because A is our next open string root. So for each of these root notes, I'm going to share all the scales I found, but for each one, I'm always going to start with the best scale options for that chosen root. What I mean by the best scale option is the scales which can use every open string from E to A. A quick way to figure out the best scale options for the chosen root is to use this bit of knowledge which I've worked out. There are 4 parent scales which can use all of the open strings, and these 4 parent scales are C major, G major, D major, and D melodic minor, and therefore any of the modes from these parent scales will also be able to use all of the open strings. So let's start with our first root note, E. First, we work out the best scale options by asking the question, is the note E in any of those parent scales? Well, yeah, it's in all 4 of them. So we then work out what the mode is in relation to those parent scales, with E being the root. For C major, it would be E Phrygian. For G major, we'd get E Aeolian. And for D major, we'd get E Dorian, which is definitely a really useful one. So what I'm doing here is I start on the root note of the scale, and then I cascade down. But I make sure that the fingering allows each open string to ring out as much as possible. The hybrid picking thing with the right hand really helps with this as well. You probably recognise this sort of cascading sound from country music actually, because this is a really common technique for stuff like this. But there's no reason we can't apply this sound to modern harmonic choices and use it within our own scale vocabulary. Okay, so then lastly, for the best scale options, D melodic minor gives us E Phrygian natural 13. All of these shapes are actually really similar to each other, especially when thinking of the parent scale, and so we can also use these shapes as a visualization tool for the other root notes and their scale options or modes. So that's our best scale options, but now we also want to try other practical or commonly used scales for this E root note too. And even though they'll no longer use every open string, there's still going to be some great options which will allow us to get this sound into our playing. So at this point, I'd first now try just an E major scale. So this scale can't use the open G or D string, however it still sounds great. And remember, this shape is also going to work for all the modes of E major too. I should mention that what I'm making sure to do is finger this so that the fretted notes ring over each other wherever possible. For example, I choose to play this A note on the 2nd fret G string instead of the 7th fret D string. This is so that we get the cluster between the A and the G sharp, which momentarily ring over each other. This helps create the illusion of an open string sound. However, you are going to need to make some choices, because when I get down to this E note, I could either put the cluster from the F sharp to E, or from the E to D sharp. This is going to depend on what sound you prefer, but it's also very much going to depend on what's the most comfortable fingering for a clean execution at higher speeds. This may also depend on what you chose to do before. For example, if I chose to play that previous A note on the 2nd fret G string, then that fingering sets up the cluster from the E to the D sharp much better than the F sharp to the E. Just experiment and find what you like while keeping a good balance between the best sound choice and the most comfortable fingering. So, next scale. I'd now try an E Lydian shape, which of course can also be used for all the modes of B major. Everything's pretty similar to the E major shape, apart from we raise the A's to an A sharp, so we lose one of the open strings. But it still has a really great usable sound. We just, again, analyze it to find the best fingering choice. So that's the major choices which I found worked for this E root. Let's now look at the minor options. Well, we already covered most of them because they were in the best scale option category. However, we can also include E melodic minor and E harmonic minor. So here's the shape for E melodic minor and all its modes. For E harmonic minor and its modes, we just changed the C sharp to a C. Let's now look at the dominant options for this root. First, we have E mixed Lydian, which is from the A major modes. From there, for an E Lydian dominant, which is a mode from B melodic minor, we would just raise the A's to an A sharp and adjust the fingering. We could also lower the C sharps to C's, which would give us E mixed Lydian flat 6, which comes from A melodic minor. And we could also have an E Phrygian dominant, which is a mode from A harmonic minor. And we'd get there by lowering the C sharp and F sharp. How about E altered? This comes from F melodic minor and it also works really well. Now let's check out the symmetrical scale options. So let's do E half whole diminished. This shape will also work great for the roots of minor third of part 2, so G, B flat and C sharp half whole diminished. It'll also work for the whole half diminished scales which are a semitone above each of those roots, so for F, A flat, B and D whole half diminished. The E augmented scale works really well too. Again, this shape will also work great for the C and A flat augmented because they're the same scale. And finally, for this root note, E Locrian, which is the same as F major, can also work. And if we raise the F to F sharp, then we get E Locrian natural 9, which can be used as a shape for all the G melodic minor modes. So before we continue, I wanted to quickly share why I started working on this idea. Basically, it's really common that when we first start learning the guitar, we get taught these kind of basic open string chord shapes, right? And these of course have a really beautiful sound, but as I learnt more on the guitar, I started to avoid these open string sounds because I associated it with something a beginner would do, which of course is completely silly, right? I started to focus more on using the kind of traditional jazz guitar voicings and drop chords that allowed me to play extensions which worked in any key. You know, this kind of thing. But after a while, I realized that the sound of open strings ringing is such a beautiful characteristic, and one which is pretty unique to the guitar as well, so it's crazy to avoid them. I started to search for voicings which made use of the open strings as clusters or extensions to a specific chord. And even though it was less transferable to every key, it still led me to really nice, worthwhile sounds like this. Or even... But then recently I thought, why stop at chords? Surely this is worth exploring for ways I could also use these open string sounds for single note lines as well. That's when I started working on this concept. Okay, so what we now do is change the root note to F and find the scales which work, starting with our best scale options, but this time there's only 2 of them. First one is F Lydian, which is from the modes of C major. So this is the same shape which we used for the E Phrygian scale from before, but just viewed from F now being the root. However, I should say that I'm viewing this shape as C major because it's a good reference point to allow me to easily apply this shape to different root notes. This also helps me just visualize this universal shape when applying it to any mode from C major. The last best scale option for F is F Lydian augmented, which is from D melodic minor. We can now look at the other options. So F major, again we had this shape before on the E root. If we raise the C to C sharp, then we get F Ionian sharp 5, which works for D harmonic minor modes. We can do F Lydian dominant, which comes from C melodic minor. If we lower the B to B flat, we also get a F mixolydian scale, which can be used for the modes of B flat major. However, it doesn't work that well because the open string options for B flat major aren't that great. For the minor options, F melodic minor works okay. And if we lower the D to D flat, we get F harmonic minor. I did also put down F Dorian and F Aeolian when first writing these ideas down. However, the open string options for those aren't actually that great. We can, however, do the F whole half diminished scale because that will just be the same shape as what we use for the E half whole diminished scale. So let's carry on with the next root note, F sharp or G flat. There's a couple really great ones for this, but let's start with the best scale options. Again, we only get two of them. So the first one, we have F sharp Phrygian, which is the D major shape. If we now lower the C sharp to C, we get the other best option, which is F sharp Locrian, and that one comes from G major. I didn't really like any of the major options, but for the minor, F sharp Aeolian worked okay. If we raise the D to D sharp, we lose one of the open strings, but we get F sharp Dorian. For the dominants, we could do F sharp mixolydian flat 6, which is B melodic minor, and from there we could raise the D to D sharp for just an F sharp mixolydian. However, they don't feel that good. The two which I feel really work are the F sharp Phrygian dominant. For this one, I feel the ringing strings really complement the feeling of this harmonic sound. You're going to want to jump to the 8th fret on the D string to get that cluster between the A sharp and G. The other one which works well is F sharp altered. You could also try F sharp half whole diminished, but the shape doesn't work quite as well as the E half whole diminished from earlier. Okay, for the G root, we have all the four best options again, so starting with G major. G Lydian, which is D major. We then have G mixolydian, which is from the C major shape. And finally, G Lydian dominant, which comes from the D melodic minor. There's a couple more major options which we could do, such as the G Lydian augmented and the G Ionian sharp 5. And for the minor options, we have the same shapes we used before, which give us G melodic minor, or by using the F major shape, it would give us G Dorian. But the one which I think works extremely well for this G root, and should really be in the best option category, is the G half whole diminished. This is the same as the E half whole diminished from earlier, but for me it just really visually sits nicely around this G7 area. For example, using it in a 2/5 context. I mean, how good does that sound? Okay, almost there. So for the A flat root, this one has some really interesting options which we can use. However, it doesn't actually have any of the best options where it uses all of the open strings. The first one which I thought worked really nicely was A flat Lydian augmented sharp 9. This is a mode from C harmonic major. By changing the E's to E flats, we could also get just an A flat Lydian sharp 9, which comes from C harmonic minor. As mentioned before, A flat augmented works really well because it's the same as the E augmented shape which we've already covered. Same for the A flat whole half diminished. That's the same as the F whole half shape, or the E half whole, or even the G half whole shape which we've just looked at. The last one which I thought worked well was A flat altered, which can be seen as a melodic minor shape. So, onto our last root note A. This one does have the four best scale options, so for C major, that gives us Aeolian. G major gives us A Dorian. D major gives us A mixolydian. And D melodic minor would give us A mixolydian flat 6. So loads of useful stuff there. Also, with A mixolydian, we could raise the D to D sharp to get to A Lydian dominant, and for A mixolydian flat 6, we could lower the B to B flat for an A Phrygian dominant scale. As we know from before, an A melodic minor shape works well because we've used that for other root notes. Also, we can do just an A major shape. And if we raise that D to D sharp, we get A Lydian. Finally, we can get an A Phrygian scale by using the F major shape. Also, if you raise the F to F sharp, we get an A Phrygian natural 13, which comes from G melodic minor. Okay, so now that we've covered all these scales, I wanted to quickly mention a couple things for practicing them further. Even though just by descending through the scale it sounds great and it's an effect, or it's even just a line in itself, we still want to practice these shapes in ways that allow us to include segments of this concept into our language. So, we want to make sure we practice these scale shapes in the same way we would practice any other. For example, we could practice these scales in groups. Here's groups of 3. We could also do groups of 4. Maybe groups of 5. Or groups of 6. We could even practice in thirds, like what we do with other scale shapes. Also, instead of always starting on the root note or just descending like this, to help generate vocabulary, try starting on different notes of the scale, or even sliding up into a note before starting the shape. So maybe something simple like this. And then we start the shape. Or even things like this. So thanks so much for watching. This is still a new concept to me, which I'm still trying to find ways of getting into my language, but I totally love the sound of it, so I definitely think it's worth pursuing. If you have any more thoughts on this or have your own discoveries, I'd love to hear them, so make sure to comment below. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on anything. And there's also some links which you can check out in the description as well. So as always, thanks again, and I'll see you next time.